House. She just doesn't care about the American people, especially hardworking people or middle-class Americans. She just doesn't give a damn about you.
The Harris campaign says it's Trump who'll hurt working families with tax cuts for corporations.
Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
She'll make groceries more affordable by cracking down on price gouging. And she'll cut housing costs by taking on corporate speculators.
The economy is voters' top issue in this election. That's a problem Harris needs to fix quickly, says political consultant Hank Scheinkopf.
She's got to explain why people are paying what they think is more at the gas pump and why their bread costs as much as it does and why the manufacturers of those products are giving them less for their dollar.
Trump running mate J.D. Vance says voting for Harris means losing more U.S. jobs.
Think of all the powerful interests, the broken bureaucracy in this country, the people who've gotten rich shipping your jobs to China. They want Kamala Harris. The only way to beat him and the only way to fight back is at the ballot box this November.
Harris's running mate Tim Walz says it's Democrats who are committed to U.S. workers.
Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, they have something a little different in mind. The only thing these guys know about working people is how to take advantage of them, how to not pay them. Every single chance they've gotten, they've waged a war on workers and the ability to collectively bargain.
With just over 2 months to go, this is a close race. Most public opinion polls show Harris with a slight lead over Trump nationally. Michigan voter David Martinez backs Trump.
He's true American patriot. I think that he thinks more about people that live in this country than he does himself. Everything that he does is to try to help somebody.
Georgia voter Becca Rush backs Harris.
You know, it's 2024, and we need some fresh blood, and we need a new brighter future.
While continuing to campaign, Trump and Harris will spend much of the next week preparing for their first presidential debate next Tuesday. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
With the US presidential election drawing close, analysts are seeing an increase of foreign efforts to disrupt the outcome. They say information manipulation, political violence, and intimidation are on the rise. Here's Veronica Balderas Iglesias.
U.S. voters are increasingly being targeted by domestic actors who spread false information ahead of the 2024 presidential election. That's according to an election vulnerabilities report by the human rights group Freedom House.
People here in the United States who are percolating conspiracy theories and misleading information about politics. Some 70% of Republicans and Republican-leading voters have been captured by the conspiracy theory that the results of the 2020 presidential election were illegitimate. Now, ahead of 2024, we've seen that narrative already emerging and dominant.
There's also a rise in online intimidation and harassment of election officials, as well as political violence, the researcher notes.
We've seen political candidates experiencing direct attacks, including, of course, the assassination attempt against former President Trump. Hate speech and hate crimes against marginalized groups are on the rise.
While the voting infrastructure itself remains protected, cyber attacks are a source of concern, Vestinson says.
The most vulnerable targets are campaigns and websites that provide people with information about the voting itself.
The FBI is currently investigating alleged Iranian hacking attempts against the Trump and Biden-Harris campaigns. A second report from the cybersecurity company Recorded Future finds an increase in malign influence operations by Iran, Russia, and China. They include the use of artificial intelligence to develop inauthentic articles that are then posted on fake news websites that look like mainstream media.
To introduce bias within the content that has a political slant or a political leaning in a specific direction based on the corresponding government's geopolitical objectives and how those geopolitical objectives correspond to their best interests with which candidate ends up winning the election.
How effective are those efforts?
At this point, we have no hard data to suggest that these operations have historically actually impacted the results of the election.
U.S. voters are nonetheless encouraged to remain vigilant and wary of grammatical or spelling mistakes found in the articles and website domains they come across, which could give away the impersonation attempt. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
We turn to the ongoing war in Ukraine, where Russia has stepped up its attacks. Strikes in recent days hit a hospital, among other buildings. And late in August, a strike on a hotel killed a Reuters safety advisor. That same attack injured other journalists who used the hotel as a base. When confronted with the evidence, though, Moscow tries to deny targeting civilian sites. Here's VOA's Polygraph team with the details.
The Kremlin neither denied nor admitted Russian responsibility for a missile attack on a hotel hosting foreign journalists in Kramatorsk, eastern Ukraine, on August 24th. The strike killed Ryan Evans, a safety advisor for a Reuters news agency crew, and injured 2 Reuters journalists and other reporters. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov downplayed the significance of the attack, arguing Russia does not target civilians and that Evans was not a journalist. I read information from the agency staff that he was not a journalist, but some kind of security advisor. I repeat once again, strikes are carried out on military infrastructure or facilities in one way or another related to military infrastructure. That is false. Evans was part of a Reuters news crew and had worked for the agency since 2022. He was entitled to the same protections as other media workers under international law, which also forbids directly targeting civilian objects. Press watchdogs say Russia has a well-documented history of systematic attacks on civilian structures housing foreign journalists in Ukraine. Reporters Without Borders said the Russian military hunts down journalists in Ukraine's Russian-occupied territory, giving them a choice between collaboration, prison, or death. RSF has documented 53 events in which 121 journalists have been victims that could be classified as war crimes. Not including Evans, the Committee to Protect Journalists has documented the deaths of at least 15 journalists and media workers covering the war. Moscow has likewise sought to control the narrative following Ukraine's August 6 incursion into Russia's Kursk region. Russia has opened criminal cases against at least 7 journalists who have reported from Kursk, falsely stating that they illegally crossed the border into Russia. Ukraine's National Union of Journalists documented Russian missile attacks on hotels in Kharkiv and other Ukrainian cities popular among journalists, calling it a deliberate tactic to limit coverage of the war in the international media.
In times of conflict or during the dozens of elections slated to take place this year, disinformation is escalating. And advances in technology, like AI, means it's harder to spot and stop. Scammers used AI to clone the voice of one of Ghana's best-known journalists to endorse a product. Analysts warn that same technology could be used to spread disinformation ahead of the country's elections in December. Senator has the story.
Your financing conditions are not favorable and you've been forced.
From the studios of City FM in Accra, Bernard Avle's voice reaches tens of thousands of Ghanaians every weekday. Along with his team, the radio and TV host engages the nation on the award-winning City Breakfast Show and on his TV show, The Point of View.
I use a talk program platform to raise important development issues, but I also use the power of good interviews to question our duty bearers, to actually demand for accountability.
But that voice of accountability has been hijacked.
Somebody called me and said, Bernard, I'm calling to check on the sex enhancement medicine that you discussed on your TV show last week. I was like, whoa, what are you talking about?
Avle says perpetrators used artificial intelligence tools to clone his voice and show, then broadcast it on Facebook. To make it authentic, they used his show's introduction.
Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. Here on the...
But instead of talking about current affairs, the AI version promoted products.
This is me they're using, and then a voice that sounds like mine somehow learns how I introduce my show.
The people are coming up with new systems.
Computer scientist and researcher Kweku Andoyamwa notes a surge in deepfake cloning technology since 2022, with tools now easily accessible.
They charge you $1, which gives you access to clone your voice in like 3 steps. You repeat 3 phrases, and then you have a cloned version of your voice saying anything.
In an election year, the easy access to AI poses a serious threat to Ghana's peace and security, analysts say. During the 2020 election, fake news and misinformation led to unrest, and at least 8 deaths linked to political violence were recorded. Some worry that cloning technologies could make the situation worse this year. City FM has already seen increased disinformation. It says perpetrators are using the media outlet's brand and credibility to spread disinformation. For this reason, City FM is introducing security features to flag fake news and clone content in their widely circulated photos and stories. Using QR code technology, audiences can easily verify images. It is also piloting a fact-checking project funded by the Danish Embassy in partnership with the Ghana Center for Democratic Development. It brings together forensic and investigative journalists.
And then we are going the step further of also getting tech involved, combating it, and actually showing proof of the behind the scenes of actually we getting the verification of those disinformation content.
Alongside fact-check initiatives in Ghana are calls for greater public education in media literacy and the detection of fake media in the run-up to elections. Senna Anutot for VOA News, Accra, Ghana.
Countries including China, Russia, Iran, they use a range of tactics to try to influence the global stage. Beijing, for instance, sends foreign reporters to its cities to showcase culture, technology and tourism. But often, what's missing, say analysts, is an uncensored picture of China and its human rights abuses. Victoria Munga reports from Nairobi.
Kenyan veteran journalist Zubeida Kananu still thinks about a trip in July that changed her worldview.
The minute you get there, you feel like you're at home away from home.
Kananu, a news editor and the president of Kenya's Editors Guild, says she was among 5 senior journalists on a Chinese embassy-sponsored media tour.
It took us through, how media has evolved in China, the new technologies that they're using, the use of AI, the use of ChatGPT in telling their story on a day-to-day basis.
Kananu wrote about Mao Zedong, the founder of Communist China. Her article, published in Kenya's local daily, is one of many stories about China she has in the pipeline. The trip gave Kananu first-hand experience interacting with people in China.
They've embraced Africa in a way that I've never seen. And then they introduce you to their culture through food.
China sees these trips as key cultural exchanges. Chinese embassy spokesperson Leo Pangyu tells VOA. He says media cooperation can not only improve the level of the media itself, but also help deepen the political, economic, social and cultural exchanges and cooperation between countries. China's efforts include sponsoring press tours to China and even sending some journalists to Xinjiang, a region where Western media have accused Beijing of human rights abuses.
China literally wants to, in a very, in this very dark way, take these officials and take these foreign journalists to the exact location where these human atrocities are happening. And basically in this very censored and policed environment, tell them, look around, there's nothing to be seen here.
China has sought to boost its image abroad by developing an international media network and signing agreements with local outlets from Europe, Latin America and Africa, according to the International Federation of Journalists. In Kenya, Beijing has set up media houses that employ hundreds of local journalists. Chinese broadcasters are aiming to compete with Western outlets with content in local languages, including Swahili.
So now they want to do something different. They want whatever they're investing to be associated with massive information and penetrate to the village level.
While Chinese-funded large infrastructure projects have been visible examples of Beijing's influence on the continent, hosting local journalists from around the world, say experts, is a more subtle soft power approach. Victoria Amunga, VOA News, Nairobi.
Experts on China's disinformation and rights record say Beijing uses these trips to try to secure positive coverage. I earlier spoke with Yechi Wang of Freedom House about what Beijing wants out of the media tours and what journalists should be aware of. Thank you for being with us, Yechi.
Thank you so much for having me.
China says that this is a chance to show journalists their culture, their technology. But what is the reality of these trips? What is China not showing these journalists?
Well, those trips are usually very orchestrated and it's very restrictive. Journalists can't venture to talk to whoever they wanted. They cannot even, go to another location that is not authorized by the Chinese government. So it's very, very restricted. They can only go to places that the government send them to. They can only talk to people that the government send them to talk to.
China's become very restrictive recently with visas and with access to foreign media. Without having a Chinese minder on one of these trips, how easy is it if you wanted to go and speak to an everyday person in China about what's happened?
It has always been very difficult, but in recent years it's getting really, really difficult. That applies to everywhere in China, and that's, as I said, applied to everywhere in China, especially in regions like Xinjiang and Tibet. In Tibet, it's just banned by law, but in Xinjiang, technically, you can still apply for a visa to get into Xinjiang. Even when you actually get into Xinjiang, you're followed everywhere. Journalists have sent pictures of themselves having cars behind their own car, having people who are, look suspicious following them wherever they go.
Some of the journalists you go on them, they get to travel, they get all this access to sort of Chinese culture and new ideas presented, as presented by Beijing, and come back with positive stories. How does China typically respond to foreign negative coverage?
Well, Freedom House research does show that, people who actually went, African journalists who went to China, who participate in those press tours, some did come back with a lot of positive coverage about just parroting Chinese government propaganda. Generally, I think it's to the Chinese government advantage that they did those trips, and then foreign journalists had positive coverage. But sometimes it doesn't always work as they wanted. In terms of when you are actually doing critical coverage of the Chinese government's human rights abuses in China, there are a lot of repercussions, even in the country that the journalists live in. They get censored by their own editors, the owners of their news outlet, because somehow either the news outlet is owned by China, but by Beijing, or somehow partnered with Chinese state media, or maybe the owner has some business in China. So the journalists, the African journalists, the Kenyan journalists, they get harassed, intimidated by Chinese government, whether it's by the consulate who denounce them, saying your coverage is biased, you're smearing the Chinese China's image, all that.
Since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia has used legislation, like its foreign agent law, to target critical media outlets. Now, former Soviet countries are replicating that law in a move that worries critics. Liam Scott reports.
Tens of thousands of people took to the streets of Georgia's capital, Tbilisi, this year to protest a new law targeting foreign-funded groups, but to no effect. When the law goes into force in September, nonprofits and media with more than a fifth of their funding from foreign sources will be required to register as so-called foreign agents, or risk inspection and hefty fines. The law supporters say it will bolster transparency and Georgian sovereignty. But analysts warn the legislation could be used to silence government critics and push Georgia further from the West.
If they have to register, it will limit their abilities to report freely and critically of the authorities. But if they don't register, then they can be ruined financially.
Georgia was celebrated as one of the freer former Soviet countries, but it has grown closer to Moscow in recent years, amid declining freedoms and rising corruption, according to Said.
Georgia is basically at the crossroads between Russia and the West.
Some groups in Georgia say they will pay the fines rather than register as a foreign agent. That includes the Media Development Foundation, a press freedom group.
It's quite complicated time for independent institutions in Georgia, but it's our fight, and we should defend our rights, and we should defend democracy in Georgia.
Georgia is the latest in the region to adopt the Russia-style law. Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan have enacted similar laws too. And while the United States has its own Foreign Agents Registration Act, watchdogs say the Russian law is more expansive and used to target critics. Moscow has designated dozens of media outlets as foreign agents, among them VOA and its sister network, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, known as RFERL.
It becomes more difficult, but we're not going to be deterred. We continue to stay on the mission.
Failure to comply with Russia's law brings steep fines and the risk of imprisonment. It is one of the reasons RFERL and other outlets move teams to other European cities.
We decided to stay as long as we can because being on the ground is crucial for us. And the pretext for leaving the country was the threat to security of journalism.
Russia's crackdown on media after its full-scale invasion of Ukraine resulted in many journalists going into exile, including to neighboring Georgia.
With this legislation, Georgia may also lose that status of a safe haven for lots of critical journalists from other countries, which will be very bad.
With parliamentary elections in October, media defenders are anxious about how the new law will affect press coverage. Liam Scott, VOA News.
Even in the most censored countries, media and dissenting voices can play an important role as watchdog. A group of North Korean defectors in Seoul has started a news website to expose North Korean human rights abuses. And they want to provide a more nuanced perspective about their homeland. Bill Gallo reports from the South Korean capital.
When North Korea appears in global newscasts, it's usually scenes like this that dominate. The country's leader, Kim Jong-un, overseeing a weapons test. But those kinds of martial images obscure much of what's really going on in the country, says North Korean defector Lee Sung-min.
North Korea is more than nuclear weapons and Kim Jong-un. There is a lot of people with different perspectives and different hopes and goals for the future of their country.
Lee fled North Korea in 2012. He now helps run a website called NK Insider, whose goal is to elevate North Korean voices.
A lot of people are talking about North Korea, like the scholars and experts, but there is certain differences when you hear the voices of North Koreans who lived there in that system.
About 8 North Korean defectors write for the website, launched earlier this year. They communicate secretly with sources inside North Korea for their reporting. Some don't want to appear on camera. Zain Han, a former Pyongyang resident, fled North Korea just 2 years ago.
Nobody can imagine what the situation is like inside North Korea, what the people experience inside North Korea, really as a slave inside North Korea. But I was there, I know.
Han is one of very few North Koreans to recently make it to the South. That's because North Korea has tightened border security since the pandemic.
It's getting more and more difficult to see the new defection from North Korea. The ordinary North Korean people's chance is, I think, almost like a zero.
He says one of his goals is to speak for North Koreans who have no voice and cannot leave.
To give a platform to North Korean defectors and by extension to those still living inside North Korea.
Doing what he can to provide a more nuanced perspective of his homeland. Bill Gallo, VOA News, Seoul, South Korea.
For the latest news, you can log on to voanews.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. And for all the press freedom related content, you can follow me on X at Jessica Dorit. Catch up on our past episodes at our free streaming service, VOA+. I'm Jessica Dorit. We'll see you next week for The Inside Story.
This week on The Inside Story, with both parties' nominees firmly in place, the focus now shifts to the nuts and bolts of policy, immigration reform, and America's southern border with Mexico, a rising China, and the tit-for-tat tornado of tariffs, support for allies like Israel and Ukraine, and tens of millions of Americans reached voting age since the last election. We'll show you how that may play out in November. Now, on The Inside Story, USA Votes 2024, Foreign Policy.
Hello and welcome to The Inside Story. I'm Elizabeth Lee. This week we focus on the destabilizing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, regions sure to be affected by the differing foreign policies of the U.S. presidential candidates. Israel on Tuesday announced it had rescued one of the hostages taken on October 7. Still, more than 100 remain unaccounted for, and Israeli forces continue to attack suspected Hamas sites in Gaza. Meanwhile, the war continues to expand into Lebanon. On Sunday, Israeli troops and Hezbollah exchanged cross-border fire, marking the heaviest exchanges in months. All this as ceasefire talks continue in Egypt. VOA's Patsy Wirakoswara begins our coverage.
Another deadly Israeli strike on another refugee camp in Gaza as negotiators strive to reach a ceasefire deal in return for the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. One of them was rescued on Tuesday.
Welcome
home, Farhan al-Qadi. I congratulate the Israeli army and Shin Bet on another successful rescue operation. We are working tirelessly to bring all our hostages back.
That's a message Vice President Kamala Harris also underscored as she accepted her nomination as the Democratic Party's presidential nominee last week.
President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Outside of her term as vice president, Harris has no foreign policy background. Her national security advisor is Philip Gordon, who served under Democratic presidents including Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, as well as Joe Biden.
End this war!
This signals a continuity with past Democratic administrations, including on military support for Israel, something her former national security advisor reaffirms.
The vice president and the president have supported U.S. military assistance to Israel, not just per the existing agreement that we have with Israel, but also an increase this year because of their security needs.
This despite demands from Arab and Muslim Americans, as well as progressive and young Democrats, for an embargo on arms sales to Israel. At the same time, Harris has expressed more sympathy towards Palestinian suffering than Biden has.
We can't learn a lot from what she says, because what she says now is directed to winning an election and to keeping the Democratic Party together. And since the Democratic Party is divided between those who are more sympathetic to Israel and those who are more sympathetic to the Palestinians about evenly, she has to say basically platitudes. And that's what she's done.
Compared to Biden, who often underscores he is a Zionist, Harris, the daughter of immigrants from Jamaica and India, may be more cognizant of views from the global South.
She is aware of how the rest of the world may feel about the Middle East, about neocolonialism, neo-imperialism. And I really hope that she has the opportunity to bring those experiences to bear if she becomes the president, because that is the reality of what U.S. foreign policy needs to confront the challenges ahead, which are very different from the challenges of the past 3 decades.
Should she win in November, Harris will inherit the challenges of her predecessors, including a protracted conflict in the Middle East. She will need to formulate her own foreign policy, a high-stakes complex affair that juggles multiple interests. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
Former President Donald Trump meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
No president has done what I've done for Israel, and we've always had a very good relationship.
Trump has previously criticized Netanyahu for security failures he claims enabled the October 7th Hamas attack. Unpredictability was a hallmark of Trump's foreign policy while in office. One analyst told VOA the Republican Party's 2024 foreign policy platform reflects that.
There are not a ton of specifics. That gives him the advantage of being able to shape a policy in a way that he sees fit in the moment, rather than getting locked into policies at the outset of a term.
Trump's fellow Republicans claim the social media app TikTok is controlled by the Chinese government and can be used to access user information and influence political beliefs.
I do not want the Chinese Communist Party getting personal data about our citizens, nor being able to have algorithms that would propagandize the American public.
But Trump reversed his position on banning TikTok this year.
We're going to save TikTok. They want to destroy TikTok. So all of the people on TikTok vote for Trump.
Trump has also criticized NATO, claiming member countries do not pay their fair share for the common defense. His running mate, vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance, has been even more critical of the United States sending aid money to Ukraine.
But let's not mistake the courage of the Ukrainian troops on the ground with the fact that they have the most corrupt leadership and corrupt government in Europe, and maybe the most corrupt leadership anywhere in the world.
That is in direct opposition to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has argued aid to Ukraine is essential to defending democracy in Europe.
It's no longer a settled question that America will meet aggression with overwhelming force, or even that we'll back our allies 100%.
Analysts say Trump's calls to raise tariffs if he is elected to a second term could cause the most conflict with Republican lawmakers.
It shows the transformation of the Republican Party since 2016, because the Republicans historically have been free traders.
Trump has pledged to introduce at least 60% tariffs on China and 10% tariffs on imports from other countries if he is reelected. Catherine Gibson, VOA News.
Russia launched a barrage of missile attacks and drones inside Ukraine, targeting the country's energy infrastructure. The attacks damaged part of the country's electricity and water supply infrastructure and also killed at least 6 people. At the same time, Ukrainian forces continue their advance into Russian territory near the western city of Kursk. They have reportedly captured hundreds of Russian prisoners, and Kyiv hopes the new prisoners can be swapped for Ukrainian POWs, some of whom came home this weekend. Anna Chernikova reports.
Voice of America attended the 55th exchange of the prisoners of war between Ukraine and Russia, which happened symbolically as Ukraine celebrates its 33rd Independence Day. This is the first prisoner exchange between the two countries since Ukraine began its operation in the Kursk region. 115 Ukrainian prisoners of war returned home. According to the Ukrainian Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War, all servicemen are conscripts, including those who were captured in the first months of Russia's full-scale invasion in February of 2022.
Today we managed to return 115 of our heroes home, and the total number of our freed citizens to date is not 3,405, but 3,520 heroes and heroines.
Ukrainian soldiers look exhausted but happy to be home. Many of them, like Yevhen, who did not want to give his full name for security reasons, spent 2.5 years in Russian captivity.
2.5 years. It is, of course, very difficult, but it's okay. We endured. Our boys are still there, waiting to return home. We spent so much time in captivity, I think not for nothing. Most of the boys who were exchanged will continue their service. We will continue to defend our motherland. The main thing is to hold on, not to give in. They will soon break their teeth on us.
It's very difficult to be in captivity there, thousands of kilometers from home. Very hard.
President Volodymyr Zelensky says that one of the main goals of the Ukrainian operation in the Kursk region is to increase the exchange fund and return Ukrainian prisoners.
In general, this operation became our largest investment in the process of freeing Ukrainian men and women from Russian captivity. We've already captured the largest number of Russian prisoners in one operation, and this is a significant result. It is one of our goals.
This exchange took place 3 weeks after Ukraine's surprise incursion into Russia. According to Ukrainian officials, Ukrainian forces have already captured thousands of Russian servicemen. Many of them are conscripts. The Russian Social Movement for the Search and Return of Russian Military Personnel from Captivity reported that 115 Russian conscripts were returned to Moscow as a part of the exchange. While there is no official confirmation that these Russian conscripts were captured in the Kursk region, many in Ukraine believe the operation in Kursk will improve the chances of the Ukrainian prisoners of war coming home. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
The candidates that win November's presidential election will inherit a world filled with challenging foreign policy issues. They include America's policy at the southern border with Mexico and immigration, support for Israel, U.S.-China competition and tariffs, plus aid to Ukraine. Each party's policy platform on how to handle these issues is different, especially on Ukraine. Harris, like President Joe Biden, says the U.S. will not waver. But Trump says he'll slash support, even once saying he'd let Russia do, quote, whatever the hell they want. There's a lot to unpack, but we've got you covered in our special foreign policy segment.
This was a gold mining town, the richest strike in the state of Arizona at the time.
Now a ghost town.
Yeah.
Patty Burris lives here with Beano, her 38-year-old donkey.
Come here, buddy. There you go.
Burris says she's tired of undocumented migrants sneaking across her land from the Mexican border. Former President Donald Trump gets her vote.
He's going to deport them. Yes, I am all for that. Absolutely. Get them out of here, and he can do it. He knows how.
While President Donald Trump ordered a 740-kilometer wall be built at the U.S. southwestern border, this is the Arizona portion of it. On his first day in office, Joe Biden paused any new construction on the wall.
They could have had it completed in 3 weeks.
Donald Trump returned to an Arizona border wall last Thursday, although the Washington Post reports the section he visited was built before he became president.
Because there's never been a border in the whole world that's leaked like this border, with all those millions and millions of criminals coming through.
Democratic voters at their convention say their party is more tolerant.
Immigrants, we belong, the neighbors, we take care of each other. That's really what it's all about.
If elected, Vice President Kamala Harris promises a path to citizenship and the return of a bipartisan immigration bill that died in Congress.
The Border Patrol endorsed it. But Donald Trump believes a border deal would hurt his campaign. So he ordered his allies in Congress to kill the deal.
Back at the ghost town. So Harris would not control the border as much as
Don't believe a word she says. Where's she been in the last 4 years?
Nobody stops by the old deserted town much anymore. Burris says she'd like to go back to the time when she saw more tourists come through than migrants. Carolyn Persutti, VOA News, Pierce, Arizona.
Thousands of Central American migrants cross Mexico every year, heading for the U.S. border. Coordinating with the region to address the root causes of migration was a task assigned to Vice President Kamala Harris, leaving her open to attacks from her November rival, former President Donald Trump.
She was a bum, a failed vice president in a failed administration, with millions of people crossing, and she was the border czar.
Harris is not the administration's border czar, but on immigration, she brings a tough message to the campaign trail, highlighting her experience as California's Attorney General.
went after transnational gangs, drug cartels, and human traffickers that came into our country illegally. I prosecuted them in case after case, and I won. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has been talking a big game about securing our border, but he does not walk the walk.
If elected, Harris said she'll bring back President Joe Biden's border bill that was killed by pro-Trump Republicans in Congress. She'd continue his efforts to help Ukraine while preventing direct war with Russia and work to maintain unity among NATO allies. Also expect continuity in the Indo-Pacific.
The United States stands with the Philippines in the face of intimidation and coercion in the South China Sea.
And on trade with China.
She will continue, as she has said, to try to de-risk from China. We know that when she ran for president in 2020, she was fairly tariff averse, like President Biden. She seems to have changed her mind about that. So more continuity than otherwise.
On Gaza, Harris is aligned with Biden, aiming for a ceasefire and preventing a regional war. However, with a large swath of the Democratic electorate angry at Biden's staunch support for Israel, Harris appears to be much more sympathetic to Palestinian casualties.
We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
Harris has embraced the Biden doctrine of leading by relying on allies and partners and has focused on non-traditional security threats, chairing the National Space Council and promoting the administration's policies on artificial intelligence and climate.
So when people say, oh, she just had the immigration portfolio and we have a terrible immigration problem, they aren't really encompassing the full role that she's played in every region of the world.
Despite her almost 4 years of traveling the globe, meeting 150 heads of state and government, Trump says Harris is inexperienced and unaccomplished.
She is a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country.
Her response?
If you got something to say,
Patsuida Huswara, VOA News at the White House.
Campaign organizers from both parties are working on getting new, young voters who are finally old enough to be eligible to vote in November to the ballot box. Organizers say they've seen a swell in voter enthusiasm and support, but younger voters have historically low turnout at the polls. VOA's Tina Trin explores what it takes to motivate young voters.
A growing share of U.S. voters are young people who could play a pivotal role in the general election this November, perhaps even helping to elect the first woman president in U.S. history. That is, if they turn out to vote.
The reasons why young people are a little bit more dubious about showing up this election cycle is directly tied to their frustration with how our current government is working. Young people are experiencing a lot of frustration because they're not seeing change happen at the speed in which they would like to see it happen in their communities.
But since Vice President Kamala Harris became the Democratic presidential nominee, there's been a notable shift in terms of excitement.
The numbers with young voters in particular were great. On enthusiasm especially, we saw a 5 percentage point increase in young voters' intent to vote basically overnight.
19-year-old Celeste Galvez is one of those who's feeling energized by the change.
I was not really planning on even voting in the first place, but now that he's dropped out and Kamala's running, I'm more excited for stepping into a new world where you can have a woman as a president. I'm actually excited about politics now.
The excitement has translated to a spike in new voter registrations. Vote.org reported over 100,000 people registering to vote in the 7 days after Joe Biden announced he was stepping down, with voters ages 18 to 34 making up nearly 85% of those new registrations. But the presidential race remains close, and there are equal numbers of young voters, particularly young men, who favor former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee.
a lot of them don't find that the U.S. economy as a whole works for them. So when Democrats talk about record job growth, huge number of jobs that President Biden has created, they don't see themselves in that framework.
26-year-old Frankie Russell is one of them.
The way to get my age is that you got to talk to my age group. You can't be running the same low taxes, the claim of like, we just lower taxes, guns, and faith. I'm like, well, that's not enough. We need other stuff, we need American first policy in general, no new wars. No sending our money overseas, but keeping it at home.
Frustration does not equal apathy. Young people actually understand what's happening in politics. They care about what's going on. They're just not seeing the change that they want to see be actuated through engaging in the electoral process. But I think that the switch up that has happened over the last couple of weeks has definitely created a new trajectory.
Whether that trajectory will extend to the ballot box remains to be seen, but it's clear that young voters should not be discounted come November. Tina Trin, VOA News, New York.
Since 2020, Asian Americans have been the fastest growing group of eligible voters in the United States. This according to the Pew Research Center. Just 2 years ago, California had the highest number of eligible Asian American voters in the U.S., followed by New York and Texas. I recently visited Houston, Texas, the most diverse large city in the U.S. One-bedroom community there has a population that is more than 20% Asian. For flavors from Asia, Houston, Texas is a one-stop shop. The foods found here reflect the melting pot of Asian cultures living in the counties that make up the greater Houston region. One of them is suburban Fort Bend County, where Asians make up more than 21% of the population. It's also where Chinese-American immigrant J.J. Clements lives.
I think for either party, they really cannot afford to ignore the Asian community.
Asian Americans are among the fastest growing ethnic groups in the U.S., according to census data. Voter turnout among this group has also seen record increases in the past two presidential elections. The Democratic nominee for president, Kamala Harris, has taken notice and recently released 2 ads targeting Asians. More Asian Americans call themselves Democrat than Republican. One reason? More than half of Asian American voters are immigrants.
I think Trump's policies hurt minorities a lot.
A lot of his policies not only took aim at illegal immigrants from Mexico or South America, but also restricted legal immigration.
Still, a 2024 survey of Asian American voters found that 22% identify as Republicans.
Less government is what Asians want. More freedom and less tax.
The survey also found 31% of Asian American voters identify as independents. But 42% of Asian American voters surveyed say they have not been contacted by political candidates or a political party. Daniel Wong, who had served in local elected office, says Asian American voters are partly responsible.
We are not organized. We don't understand the American political system. That's why we don't know how we're going to put our energy together to shoot for whatever common goal, which we don't have.
The projected 15 million Asian Americans eligible to vote had also run for local office.
Asian society, I don't think they, like a Christian community, they have a habit to give. So you have to educate them, and you need to outreach them.
During the last presidential election, close to 60% of Asian Americans voted. Political ships with new Asian American citizens and educating them will mobilize them to get involved. I'm more The Inside Story.
What we do not understand, we will stigmatize.
What you can see is the remaining of the tanker that exploded.
The suspect equally confessed.
100 naira they collect am.
If you no talk, dem go beat you.
Na 2,500 they pay.
On my paintings Kike Johnson, but I mean, yeah, I think so. Thinking about it now, I'm not even sure, but yeah, I think so. Most of them have my name, apart from my fashion brand though. My name is Kike Lomo Johnson. I am a visual artist and a fashion designer. My art is inspired by a lot of things, by Black women, by colors, animations, different things, a lot of things that like inspire me, but I naturally enjoy drawing Black women. I think it's amazing, yeah. Yeah, sometimes I have artist block where I want to draw something, but I can't, I just get like, the Nigerian art space is amazing. It's growing and it's just very broad now. There are a lot of opportunities for people like me in the industry. We are doing so many amazing things, from digital art to traditional art to even NFTs. You know, there's just so many things that Nigerian creatives are doing now that I think it's just amazing. To see that Nigeria went from not appreciating art as much to now appreciating art is a good thing. Love it. I actually wish I did go to an art school. I think that way maybe I'd have been like Picasso right now. But no, I didn't go to an art school. I learned everything myself. I've always loved drawing. When I was a child, I would draw Mickey Mouse. I would draw like just different cartoonish things, you know. So I've always enjoyed drawing. I've enjoyed the process, yeah. All right, so for young female aspiring artists in Nigeria, I'll say they should go for it. I mean, in this industry, I've come to understand that there are not so many female artists as much as there are men, you know, so it's a good thing to see women want to become artists and actually do it. You know, one major thing is you just have to keep practicing, just get better at your craft, and that's it. Yeah, there are a lot of opportunities out there. Art has influenced my fashion in different ways, from colors to patterns to just creating something. Sometimes I just do a design, I'm like, okay, this is not what I wanted, but at least we tried it, you know. So art for me is life. Everything around me is art. I look at every single object and I see shadows, I see lights, I'm looking at the way it's done, you know. So art has influenced my fashion in different ways, and I'm excited about that. I mean, I enjoy it. So in a few years, I see myself doing amazing things, bigger things than I'm doing now, you know, in the international workspace, nationally, and you know, just doing, I hope to have a major studio in a few years' time where, you know, anybody can just come to us and say, okay, I want to create this type of art, and we can have someone working in the studio create it. Different things, from animations to illustrations to different type of artwork.
Hello, welcome to this edition of Timeless Conversations. Today the conversation will bring in a very dear friend and brother of mine, someone with whom we go back many decades. He is into our line of work. By that, I don't mean he appears on TV or radio, but what he does really brings to your screen in many ways stuff that will touch your heart. He's the founder and managing director of IBST Limited. It's a company that's into media and TV production right here in Lagos. I want to welcome Remi Ogunpitan to Timeless Conversation.
Thank you very much, Lekon. Yes. Nice to be here.
It's a pleasure that you came. I know how busy you can be. Now, Remi, one first question I want to ask you is this. You have a very strong Ijebu background. You also have a UK background, plus your Nigerian background. Tell me who Remi Ogunpitan is.
I don't know. I think I'm a mix of various things. You know, I think our experiences in life and our exposure, the places we live, the schools we go to, the friends that we make, and all these potpourri of experiences make us who we are. But I went to school in England. I left Nigeria when I was 5. My father was a politician. And during that period, he decided to go to England with his wife to pursue his accountancy qualifications. And he took his wife along. We were young. And they left us behind in Lagos, myself, my sister, Yetunde, and my brother, Ladipo. Yetunde and I were living with the Adelajas.
Okay.
At CMS Grammar
School compound.
Yeah, Mrs. Adelaja is the senior sister to my mother. Okay. And Ladipo was staying in Ibadan with my mother's junior sister. When they settled in England, they sent for us. I was about 5 or 6. That's my junior sister, was about 5. We went to join them. And we were with them there for many years. We went to school, went to university, started work. My father qualified, worked in various companies and organizations, and at a period in time, he decided that he was coming back to Nigeria. And he decided to come and work with the company he was working with in the UK then, and they brought him back, and he was in Kano.
What company was that?
That Raleigh Bicycles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he rose to become the managing director of Raleigh Bicycles. They came back with Yetunde. I stayed in the UK. I was then, by the time they came back, I had left school, I had left university. I was in the British Army. And I spent some time in the British Army, in the Ordnance Corps. Wow. And that was where I got the love for video communications and all of those kind of things, apart from the fact that I was a sportsman. So those were the two things I was doing. And when I left the army, I spent 3 years there, came out of the army, and I was looking at what to do. And I realized that in all this period that my parents had left me. My sister had left me, and here I was in England. And by that time, I spent like 16, 17 years in the UK. I'd never been to Nigeria during that period.
That explains your Yoruba.
Yes. So, yeah, why I don't speak Yoruba well, and why you love to hear me speaking Yoruba and like to laugh at me. It's okay, I understand. And
yes, now.
Yeah, and all my friends who are Yoruba love laughing at me and give me funny looks, but it's okay, I'm used to that too. So I decided I was going to come back and visit my parents and come and see what Nigeria was like. And I came, bought a ticket, and went to Kano. And I want to tell you a funny story, because when I was coming back to Nigeria to visit, I decided I was going to look, amazing. That when I arrived at the airport, everybody was know that this guy just landed from England, and that there was going to be everything was going to be there. I'll just pick up the phone. I'll go to the public telephone. I'll call my mom. I said, guess what? Because it was meant to be a surprise. I'm in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And all of that. So that's what I did. And I landed at Kano Airport. And I asked them, I said, please, I need a public telephone to call my parents. This is like 1980. And the guys were all looking at me. Who is this guy? public telephone, what?
What?
And I didn't have the address where they were living. All I knew as of that time was my father was the financial director of Rally Bicycles. That's all I knew. When I landed in Kano. So I came out with my stuff. I called a taxi driver and I said, look, this is where I'm going. I want to go and look for this man. I want to go to the factory. And it was funny because that was the same man when my parents arrived in Nigeria.
The same man?
Yes, that took them to their home in Alu Avenue.
In Kano?
Yes. So the man said, don't worry. I know who you are. I know where they live. And then he took me straight there. Of course, my father at that time wasn't back from work. He had gone to pick up my mother, who then was teaching, and there was no lights.
Culture shock.
No light. So he dropped me. He said I shouldn't worry about the money, that we'll come back and collect the money. And I sat there for 2-3 hours in darkness, waiting for my parents to arrive. They drove in with their 504 Peugeot. They turned the light. They just saw me like this. They just ran out of the car. So, and I was in the north. I worked for some time in the north. I'm very familiar with the north. I worked in Kano. I worked in Zaria. I worked in Kaduna. I used to play rugby. We used to travel around together. I have a lot of amazing friends that I made in the north. When I came back to Nigeria, that period, it was peaceful. There was cohesion. There wasn't a lot of all this religious, all of that. It didn't exist. The only thing that I witnessed during that period that was anything like that was the Maitasini riots.
Maitasini riots. That was in 1980 or 81.
That was the only thing. But Igbos, Yorubas, Hausa people, we mixed together. It didn't matter whether you had money or you didn't have money. We were all one. There was nobody, So that was good. So that is where you get that mix of Ijebu, where that is my origins.
Yes.
My mother is from. She always used to tease my father when he used to misbehave. That look, don't talk to me anyhow. I'm from a royal family. My father is the Daguri of Idowa. So my mother was from a royal family.
But Idowa is also Ijebu now.
Yeah, Ijebu, yes. And my father too. You tell her that look, my father was one of the richest men in Ijebu. And that's how they used to banter. And I just used to laugh. But that's my Ijebu origin.
Yes.
That's my Oyibo UK origin. To Nigeria, where I've been
since 1980.
Yeah, yes.
You see, I was going to ask you the question, but you alluded to it, so I'll just expand it now. But what attracted you to media and TV production? You said it started from the UK,
when
the
I was
British
in the
Army.
Army, yes.
Yeah.
We used to make, in those days, making career films, training films was a big thing. And I wasn't really doing that, but I was working in the department that used to do that. More like a production secretary.
Yeah, okay.
And I liked it, and I got interested in it. And when I applied to go to uni, which was Leeds University, to study film and television, it was the Army that actually...
Okay, so it was like a hop, step, and jump thing for you.
Yes, and I got into it. Then when I finished, I worked a bit in the UK, CBS Records.
Okay.
I was doing what they call new release coordination, which is a big name for a runt job. And it was during that period of doing that job I decided to come back. And, and that's when I started getting into TV production. I went back to Unilag, I did Mascom again, I met Jimmy Odumosu, worked on some of his projects, Fiery Force, and that was how I started getting into the industry.
Into the industry.
Yeah.
But you must have seen something that made you say, this is the line I was going to stay with.
It was, some things are fortuitous in the sense that it's destiny. You know, I went through a lot of different things. I worked with, when I finished at Unilab, Jimmy Odumosu was doing a project then called Fiery Force.
Fiery Force, yes, I remember
that. And I ended up being the production manager on that.
Yeah.
And I've met a whole lot of people. That was where I met Doing Jaisini and quite a lot of other people.
Doing is my cousin.
Yeah, and Doing Jaisini played a significant role in my life. Yes, because things were not easy then. My father was a bit of the disciplinarian. The way you make your bed is the way you lie in it, and at times it just leave you to sort yourself out.
Yeah.
And Doing, after school, Doing took me in, and I lived with him and his wife, Lucy.
Yeah, Lucy, yeah.
You know, and I was with Doing for almost a year. And if you you might not remember, but the commercial that we did together.
Yeah, I remember we
the
did
Sheraton
commercial.
Hotel.
Yes.
It was Doing
okay,
that took me to you.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, you see life.
That's true. That's true. That's
the circle
true.
of life, and that
Yes,
was
yes,
Doing.
Yeah, Doing is my cousin, like I said.
Doing
So,
was at LTVH. So
yes.
let's go to Lekokan.
Yes, can do
Yes,
this for you.
that was, so I went through that phase. I went through that phase of with Doing, thinking that we were going to start an amazing TV production company doing commercials. We did that commercial and then didn't get another commercial for
a while.
For
a
a
long
time.
while.
So I had to go back and look for work.
For work, okay.
And that was when I now ran into Doing Osasoni Adun.
Okay.
And I started working at DBN.
At DBN, yes, that's true.
In fact, the interview for that job was myself and Sheye Kehinde.
Really?
Yes. Sheye Kehinde looked dapper that day. If you see the suit that he wore, the shoes, I said, lie, I cannot get this job with this guy looking like this. But we did that interview together. I think he had just come back from England or something.
England too.
Yes. And I got the job. But I remember it was me and Sheye. We sat down to each other. We sat down next to each other.
Wow.
So I worked with Osa. Osa was one that really opened up my eyes.
Good.
He gave me a lot of responsibility. And he gave me a lot of opportunity. I was in charge of production. I was able to travel to around the world. Osa paid for it.
Yeah.
I'll go to NAB. I'll go to IBC.
Yeah.
I'll go to Cannes. All those places. I think he had a lot of faith in me.
Yeah.
And I was also able to challenge him in terms of, intellectually and in terms of vision and direction and everything. And I think he liked that.
Yeah.
Because he had just come back from America and he had set up a DBN. He had DAS network and everything. And we got on really well. And also had a lot of arguments. But what was important was that it was somebody that was always able to accommodate and listen. And if you could come with a superior argument, even if it will go with you. So he gave me that opportunity.
Not a lot of employers do that.
He gave me that opportunity, and I traveled and I saw and I said, this is it. This is where I want to be. I became passionate about it. I'll read everything. I'll go anything concerning media, broadcast, equipment. I wanted to be there.
You're just like a sponge.
Yes, just taking it all in.
Yeah.
And I worked with him for, I think it was about 3 years. And then the American Embassy came along and offered me an opportunity that I couldn't resist.
What was that opportunity?
They offered me a job at the United States Information Service.
Okay.
Yeah, as the audiovisual manager.
Oh, that's on Broad Street, USIS.
Yes, when, I think the director then was a guy called Bob Lagama.
Okay.
And the director of communication was Carol Wild. And that was where I met the late Livy Ajunoma.
Yeah, Livy Ajunoma, yes.
He worked there.
Yeah,
and there was an amazing house guy, Kabir Dangogo.
Okay, yes, I know that.
You know Kabir Dangogo too, yeah.
Yes.
So, but what was amazing about it was that was where I really got introduced to technology. Because even as of that time, this would be like about 1987, 86, 87, everything was computerized. And I'd never been exposed to a computer before then. It was a new thing. You know, everybody also start shouting about, I've got a 286, I've got a 386 computer,
Yes.
I've got a 486.
Yes.
And that was where I got introduced to computers and technology and everything. And I just soaked it all in. And it was the same time too that I started talking to my cousin, Wega Adelaja, about, he was then the managing director at a television company called Nationwide
Television, yes, I remember that.
Which I think was set up with the late Mike Enauro.
Mike Enauro, yes.
Yeah. Yes. And he was also running it with a guy then called Felix Egbanumo.
Yes.
So we started talking, blah, blah, blah. We're interested, can't continue working for people all our lives. This thing, we know it, let's do it. How are we going to do it? We don't have money. We'll talk, we'll see regularly. I was still at the USIS. He was at Tafawa Balewa.
Tafawa, just next door.
So we always see, always talk.
Lunchtime talk.
Yeah, lunchtime, evening, we sit down, drink beer, pepper soup. What are we going to do? So after working there for some time, I was approached by an American called Lloyd Weaver.
Oh, Lloyd Weaver. He died recently.
Yes, sir. It is.
Yes.
That's another of my...
Yes.
Lloyd. Yeah. He's so rested.
Amen, amen. He was an amazing man.
I get emotional when I think about him.
Yeah.
Lloyd approached me. They were setting up a company there called Swift Studios.
Swift before this, after
CDW.
Yes.
After CDW,
yes.
They set up Swift.
Yes.
There were some Nigerians that came around and gave them money. I don't want to mention their names.
Oh, no. We don't need their names.
They gave them money and they set up Swift Studios. And they asked me to come and work for them as the executive producer.
Okay.
The unfortunate thing though was that during that period, Wig and I were already running around trying to see where we can get money, doing proposals, budgets, business plans, and all of that. And as I started that job with them,
that's with Swift.
With Swift, yes, a lot of things started coming through on the other end of
the other end, okay.
And we approached Otumba Shibomi Balogun.
I thought you said you didn't want to mention names.
No, I must. These are the ones that are important.
This one must be mentioned.
Yes.
Okay, let me take a break now.
Okay.
We'll come back. Don't forget where you are. We're taking a break now. We'll be back with you shortly. It's still Timeless Conversations, and I'm talking with my friend and brother, Remy Ogunpiton. So you were going to mention names of, or the name of someone who stood by you in that quest.
We approached, when we decided we wanted to set up a production company, we approached Shibomi Balogun, Otumba Shibomi Balogun, who then, FCMB. But then he had a finance and security firm called City Securities.
Yeah, City Securities, yeah, that's true.
And he believed in the dream, and he gave us money, a lot of money, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds then in 1989.
It was a lot of money.
Yeah, and we took the money, and I think we did well. We set up a company called Solar Productions.
Solar Productions,
which was in Lupeju.
Yes. Down Planning Way.
Yeah, we had people like Olumide Ofere, Mike Afigo, Unwoso, plenty of, the big company.
I know all of those guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know them now.
Yes.
Moses Ebere.
Yes.
All of them. They were all, and we had an amazing business, and we quickly established ourselves in the marketplace and did a lot of work and started to make money. But things fell apart.
How?
It's simple, and I think everybody can relate to it. If a business partnership is a marriage.
Yes.
And this was not even a ordinary business marriage. This was a business marriage of family.
Yeah.
You know, everybody on the board was family.
Yeah.
In fact, City Securities Limited then was represented by Bolaji Balogun. My father was on the board. Wiga's father was on the board. But you know, the directors, they're not involved in the day-to-day running.
It's their running show.
You see, when two people who are meant to act as one have a different vision, the center can never hold.
It can't.
Whether it's in a business, whether it's in a home, whether it's any public institution, whether it's the president and the vice president.
Sure.
Once the vision diverts, it can't hold. And that's basically what happened.
What happened?
And apart from differences also, because division comes because of differences
Yes.
in approach, differences in ability, differences in skill, differences in the ability to manage funds,
even in style,
everything,
execution.
And even differences in terms of who the clients prefer to work with. Maybe they prefer working with this person to this person, and all those things become convoluted. Jealousies come in, all kinds of things come in, and it becomes difficult for the center to hold. So after 5 years, I left. And for quite a period of time, almost like a year, I didn't know what to do. I knew that, I'm going to do work in production. I knew that.
Yeah.
And then I was again, God continues to send people along. And then I was again rescued by two gentlemen called, who then were running an advertising agency called Concept Unit. Larry Awukoya. And Kaide Ido.
Yes.
Who basically came to me and said, well, look, we've been working with you for a long time. We like the way you work. Da-di-da-di-da. We've noticed that you're no longer with Bega. What do you want to do? And I said, I want to set up a production company. And they said, fine. They're interested. And they put some money up, a substantial amount of money. And I looked at the whole thing. And of course, you tell your family, look, this is what I want to do now. I want to put money up, I want to start a new business. And I remember my father said, no way, that you're not going to take their money without any of your own money in there. How much do you have? I told him, he said, no. He said, we're going to match them penny for penny. So that this time around, we have a hold. And that's what we did, things like that.